Good evening, everybody. I'm Isla Berman, the Director of Architecture, and it's with great pleasure that I'm able to introduce Alejandro Zaera-Polo this evening as our lecturer at CCA. Alejandro is an architect, an educator, and co-founder and principal of Foreign Office Architects, which is recognized as one of the world's most innovative design firms integrating architecture, urban design, and landscape architecture in a wide range of international projects. In 2002, FOA made its reputation with the Yokohama Port Terminal in Japan, a competition project from 1996 for which the firm won first place and whose realization brought to FOA international acclaim. This mega-scaled architectural urban project that extends the city of Yokohama to the waterfront combined complex multivalent programming and a set of navigational circulation diagrams with the progeny of hybrid strategies conflating the architectural container with qualities drawn from the pier, the cruise ship, and the surrounding land and seascape. Literally a thickened and occupiable ground that embeds and supports program through its differentiated topography, this project provided a critically important breakthrough through its differentiated topography, its architectural, spatial, programmatic, and material innovation, and the construction of its interwoven complex landscape. From Yokohama and then the Bundle Tower project from the World Trade Center onward, the firm has continued its success through many award-winning projects, such as the Spanish Pavilion at the International Expo in Japan, the Costa Marine Park at the Forum 2004 site in Barcelona, the Municipal Theater in Torrevieja, Spain, the Korea Publishing Headquarters in Paju, the Madrid Social Housing Project, and the London Olympic Park of 2012. FOA represented England at the 8th Venice Architectural Biennale in 2002, and they have won many awards, including the Enrique Marias Prize for Architecture, many RIBA awards, the 2004 Venice Architectural Biennale Award, and the Charles Jenks Award for Architecture. In their infamous book, Phylogenesis, which I'm happy to say is being republished or reprinted, Alejandro and his partner Farshid Mousavi unfold FOA's own phylogenetic lineage as a diagrammatic tracing of the constellation of singularities of their own practice. Unlike the architectural monograph or the manifesto that attempts to produce consistency across the heterogeneity of a practice via a branded style or a singular ideological position, this book attempts to distinguish assignable traits and classify operative strategies that are at work within FOA's projects, as one would understand the breeding of a species or organization of phyla that, true to the digital and biological codes of the 21st century environment, simultaneously draw from biology, from organic nature, and technological artifice. In addition to this book, Alejandro has also written extensively as a critic in El Croquis, Quaderns, A+U, Volume, Log, Arc Plus, Harvard Design Magazine, and The Endless City by Ricky Burdett. He received his graduate post-professional MArch for Harvard's Graduate School of Design, where we were both adequately delisified under the tutelage of Sanford Quinter. He occupies the Berlage Chair at the Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands and is a visiting professor at Princeton University. Prior to this, he served as the Dean of the Berlage Institute in Rotterdam for 4 years. He also serves on the urban committees in Barcelona and Madrid and is a member of the Urban Age think tank at the London School of Economics. Please join me in welcoming Alejandro Zaera-Polo.
Thank you very much. This one. Thank you very much, Ila, for the opportunity to be here tonight and to see you after, I think, over 18 years. I am pleased to see that you look exactly the same. So the lecture that I prepared for tonight is a kind of hybrid between an academic lecture and a professional lecture. It's a little bit too long, perhaps, so let me see if I can get this going. But hopefully we'll get through it. It's a lecture that brings together, as I was saying, some observations that I have been trying to theorize of the work of the practice in the last 5 or 6 years after Yokohama was finished, and that I have also been pursuing more on an academic practice now as a visiting professor at Princeton University primarily. And it's a lecture that, as you see from the title, relates to the subject of architectural envelopes. And why architectural envelopes? Let me make first a kind of high-level explanation of why architectural envelopes. I have been interested for now a few years in the possibility of architecture trying to regain some level of political agency, which is something that I think largely was a project that was largely abandoned by my generation as kind of pragmatists, and I think that that needs some correction, and I believe there are great opportunities ahead of architecture as a discipline that can perhaps allow or sustain social and political transformations, maybe more than the traditional disciplines of political sciences. So, as part of that idea, I have been looking at people that formed the political discourse in the last half of the 20th century, and found out that some of these guys were addressing different areas of society and trying to equalize them. That was their primary strategy as a kind of political strategy. And as I was saying, I am part of the pragmatist generation, and I became also interested in a number of other agents that from outside the political office and from outside ideology have been able to transform radically certain structures of the culture where we live, and you can see that these kind of market operators have replaced the idea of equality by the idea of cheapness, and so you will see later on that in the projects that I have selected for tonight, I've intentionally chosen those that are either commercial projects or social housing, all those projects that are not about formulating kind of big visions that will explain how society needs to operate today, but mostly projects that are driven by profit or by stringent economic conditions, because I believe that in those economic conditions is where the biggest potential for politics exists today. So the project of the envelope in reality appears. Can I have this light off, because it's really blinding me? So as I was saying, the project of the envelope is a project that in a way appears as a concrete area of the architectural discipline that I think we can, if we are able to theorize, if we are able to address, it may actually become one of these concrete subjects that I think are driven contemporary politics. I mean, going back a little bit to the discussion I started before. As you probably know, the electorates worldwide are shifting from electorates that are driven on a kind of party line allegiance or faithfulness to electorates that shift radically depending on certain issues that are foregrounded by the different candidates. And I thought that the envelope was a concrete subject that perhaps could enable us to discern what kind of handles in politics do we have from within the architectural discipline. It is a subject that is very strongly related to the way in which society is organized and its structures of authority and governance. This is a photograph that you may have seen from Andreas Gursky of the former German parliament and its super transparent enclosure. Obviously, once we start seeing or understanding what are the political contents of these elements, we can see that several orders, several political and social orders are not only represented but also implemented in the envelope primarily. But the theory that I would like to propose, and that later on I will illustrate a little bit with the projects, or I will illustrate extensively with the projects of the office, is one that if in the past the architects who were addressing some sort of political projects were relying primarily on the section and the plan as the architectural devices that establish contiguities, adjacencies, hierarchies, and so on and so forth in the society where the buildings, in the society that the building is hosting. My theory here is that in the near future, the envelope is going to become even more important than these elements in terms of shaping, in terms of acting as a political agent. These are two. Why is that? These are two images that represent theory posed already, I think it was '89, by David Harvey, of what constitutes the culture of global capital or late capital, the infrastructure of global capital and late capital, and I remember that he was very important at the beginning of our practice, because his theory was that late capitalism is enabled by what he calls mechanisms of spatial displacement, infrastructure, telecommunications, and mechanisms of temporal displacement, which is primarily credit. And so this is the picture that we were working on almost as a generation 15 years ago. And for example, Yokohama is very much a product of trying to embody that idea that we live in a borderless world, that we can move anywhere in that continuous space, and that the reality is kind of liquid and fluid and dynamic. And what we see today is that the first devices, the mechanisms of spatial displacement, are used to bomb cities, and the mechanisms of temporal displacement have dramatically collapsed on a global level, with the effect that borders, limits are reappearing everywhere with an unusual virulence. this is the American Embassy in London, for example. See what kind of borders are buildings required to have these days. There are increasing talk about protectionism everywhere in the world. So you can see that actually that idea, that utopia that maybe we grew up in, that reality was borderless and fluid and so on and so forth, is actually not so. And what probably we have to face is the possibility of what we need to do is to re-engage in reformulation of borders generally. So borders are no longer the borders that we used to know as borders, but they need to be redefined in an entirely different way. And that is basically one of the first reasons why I believe the envelope now, the building envelope, is a crucial element in terms of political agency. Then there are other reasons why this element is important. Climate change. The building envelope regulates or can control basically 70–80% of the energy that a building consumes, and therefore it becomes a crucial decision in terms of how the building performs. The building envelope also has undergone in the last few decades a process of technical development that now makes very similar the technology that builds roofs and the technology that builds walls. So where just a few decades ago you would use an entirely different technologies for these two elements of the envelope, now you see that curtain wall technology or light metal cladding technology is increasingly an element that you use for the walls and the roofs, and so that means that perhaps we need to start theorizing and rationalizing this element as a whole envelope rather than as a facade and a roof, or a facade and a silhouette, which is maybe the way in which it has been theorized in the past, and hopefully that bring together those kind of representational elements and the technical elements that regulate this homeostatic membrane between inside and outside of the buildings to make a more general theory of the building envelope. So as a kind of structure of that theory, and I will be using this classification to categorize the projects from the office that I will show later. My proposal is that there are 4 basic types of building envelopes, and depending on each one of these types, which are basically aspect ratios between dimensions of the envelope, they enable, or they are more prone to engage on certain type of concrete matters with political significance. So these 4 envelopes that, and maybe I should say also the whole theory of the envelope is an attempt also to escape from the research on the pure surface, on the pure treatment of the skin, and start to draw relationships between the constitution of that skin and a kind of the wider problem of shaping the envelope of the building. So some skins are more adequate for certain types of envelopes, and so on and so forth. And so there are these 4 types, which I call flat horizontal, flat vertical, spherical, and vertical. So I'm now going to move quickly to explain each one of them, and possibly what are the main arguments that are predominant, or the main possibilities that are predominant in each one of those types, using our own work as rather as an example, because I think that perhaps they are not the best example of what we can do with these different types of enveloping structures today. As a sample, I mean, I've discovered the subject by actually looking at the projects that were going on in the office, and I think as such they should be seen, not as a kind of examples of best practice in this kind of future theory of the building envelope. So what is called flat horizontal, you all know what kind of buildings they are. They have a kind of long history in the history of architecture also. They are sometimes also treated as a kind of utopian dream. But what I think it makes them interesting as possible political or as socially transformational devices. I don't know if that makes any sense, but as devices that we can use to kind of transform reality, is that they are usually covering a large surface with a constant section which usually hosts either usually host movement of goods and exchange in a certain location, and so that is a type of activity that is obviously central to the formation of communities. At the same time, these type of envelopes are usually so large that they require certain ways of bringing daylight in and bringing natural ventilation in, and they are so large that very often you see that they swallow pieces of nature, or I mean, it's not uncommon to see how people who design airports or shopping centers, which are some of the examples of these typologies, tend to replicate nature in a kind of very picturesque way inside of those buildings. So I think if these type of envelopes are first envelopes that probably contain important functions of social exchange and financial economical exchange in societies, they also have the function to articulate often the natural and the artificial, both in a representational level, but also on a very direct, pragmatic level, as I was explaining before, by allowing daylight and ventilation to be in or not inside of the building, by making a kind of sealed envelope or a transparent envelope. And they also have, as you can see, there is a kind of increasing amount of green roofs growing everywhere. So these envelopes, I think, address perhaps another possible political subject, which is the ground. They can challenge or they can reconstitute the ground, because they are so large that if treated appropriately, they could probably act as a challenge to the natural ground. The other maybe feature of this type of envelopes is occurs on the peripheral surface. These buildings are usually focused on the inside of the building, and there is very little function, both environmentally, because the edge of the building compared to the total amount of surface is very small, so you can basically have anything there and even not insulated, and you will not affect substantially the performance of the building. but there is also not a lot of relationship between the inside and the outside. So the particularity of the edge of this type of buildings is that they are very they lack almost things to do, and therefore architects tend to resort to all kinds of devices to make them look as if they are architecture, because they are basically about nothing. And I think that is I believe an interesting also a potential within this typology of the building envelope. So two projects that address these two surfaces, the top surface and the edge surface, that we this one concluded a few years ago in Istanbul, in the Asian side. Sorry, in this place in the middle of a highway interface, and right next to this, which is basically the flat horizontal envelope, by the kind of paradigm of the flat horizontal envelope, a blank box, sealed, not transparent to the outside, detaching the consumers from the non-consumers, detaching the inside from the outside, detaching the natural from the artificial. So how all these different categories are treated by these type of envelopes are, I think, quite profound political actions, I believe. So in a way, the approach that we took when doing this project was to challenge that type of envelope. One of the interesting things was that the earth was clay, was red, literally. Before we built the building, Istanbul is a green and red city, so we thought that rather than using the blue and the yellow of IKEA, we were going to do the opposite. We were going to kind of merge with the camouflage, with the colors, the palette of materials that is local to Istanbul. We convinced miraculously the client to explode the box. There you see our building next to IKEA, to put the parking underground in order to lose that reference to the surface of asphalt that is customary in this type of developments, and even to suggest the possibility that at some point the envelope breaks and maybe initiates surrounding fabric rather than remaining as a kind of isolated object in the urban field. So I'm not going to describe it in great detail. There is the kind of some of the iterations of the first iterations of the project, where we were trying to activate also the roof, as I was saying before, as a device that will, as opposed to IKEA, bring daylight and natural ventilation inside of the spaces, but also as a device that can be used as a new park, as a new ground, and relates in different ways to the edges of the complex. So there you see the section of IKEA and the section of our building and what it does. I'm not going to explain the building. It's a very large building. Just kind of show you a few images of how the building is built with this very reductive palette of green and clay, and how the roofs become almost like a new park, and also how that new park challenges the definition of the horizontal, the ground. So by becoming closer to the ground, you are more able to challenge it as a kind of cultural element. Not going to kind of delve into any of these. The issue of relating the natural and the artificial, the use of the skylights for natural ventilation and daylight inside of the building is also used as the device that generates the topography on top of the building, and this is how people use the areas on the building and the way the ground. I mean, these guys don't know it, but they are on unstable grounds. Second project is a project that we are developing now in Birmingham, in the center of England, and this is a project that actually could be one of these non-profit projects that represent society, but the way it was given to us was absolutely perverse in the sense that the real project, which is the redevelopment of the station, is given to a corporate company that is doing it, and we are giving about 5% of the total budget to wrap the building and make it look good. So is and also because it's a shopping center, it's a station and a shopping center, we cannot challenge the edge of the building. So again, we are in a situation in which there is nothing. I mean, the usual thing that envelopes used to exploit as a representative task, which was transparency, is impossible. So what did we do? We started thinking, what can we represent? What can we use as an argument to make this envelope? And then we realized that Birmingham is in the center of the country. It's a city that is bringing together a system of canals and roads. It's a kind of hub city, transport hub city, and so thinking that the station is right bang in the middle of the city, and that Birmingham has had this character of transport hub city, we thought that maybe we can try to represent the whole city rather than the station. So the building is a station, but the station at the same time is the symbol of this kind of transport hub, which Birmingham is. And so this is not working. I can see it here, you cannot see it there. Anyway, I think we can move on. It looks as if the animation are not running, but basically what we did was to identify in the immediate field of the station a number of elements that were moving and were somehow related to that center of the city that is defined by movement, and try to see how we can make them part of the facade. And so those were the tracks, which are, if you remember, the building is surrounded by holes because the trains are going underneath, and these holes need to be open. So there are trains, there are commuters coming in and out. This is one of the busiest stations in Europe. Then there is information that is changing and is also can be attached to the facade. And then there is an element that Birmingham used to have a famously black sky because of the steel industry and the bad weather in general. Now between heavy industry moving to Korea and other places and global warming, it has a kind of beautiful sky that we wanted to celebrate. So we produced this device, which rather than trying to make transparency, it acts by reflecting the field, the urban field surrounding the building, and so we shape those reflective surfaces in such a way that they will always reflect the sky or the public space and not the buildings in front, because Birmingham is a really ugly city. So we made a number of sections. You see the blue things are the halls where the trains are located, And you see that every one of these sections has different distances between where the public is located, because sometimes you are looking at the station from beyond the hall in front of the station. Sometimes you are next to it. And so these conditions of reflection change from one section to the next. Sometimes it becomes very complex. Sometimes it encloses or embeds the screens. So what we did was to define those few kind of crucial sections, and by morphing them, we generate the skin that will represent, if you want, the building in the future. And so that is how that surface that reflects those elements will be generated and will perform in the future. It's a kind of rain screen that is supposed to capture also the changes in light that occur in the center of Birmingham through the day, capturing the different solar conditions, but also artificial lighting, etc., etc. So these are some of the images of this project as we imagine it will be. It is starting construction now. And that was there is another animation here where you can see this idea of a kind of Koyaanisqatsi type of fresco, where you have the clouds reflecting and the trains moving and all these kind of things inside. Unfortunately, you cannot see it, but you can imagine. So the second category is the spherical category. The spherical doesn't mean necessarily spherical. It means that is a category that of envelope where the 3 dimensions are more or less similar. I call it spherical in honor of Sloterdijk, who is one of the people who inspire this research. So these are, for example, contemporary spherical buildings following my own theory. So sometimes they are not spherical geometrically at all, but you see that they have more or less same dimensions in every direction. This is a typology that has been used often as a kind of ideal visionary typology. I think primarily because it doesn't really work unless you have air conditioning, massive air conditioning, because the type of relationship between the inside and outside is very tenuous. And that's precisely what is interesting about this typology, and that's precisely what generates possibly its potential in terms of representing or embedding a certain type of culture and possibly transforming it, which is that this is the typology that, just in virtue of its geometrical qualities, has the lowest envelope ratio of all. So if you get the same, if you divide the number of square meters of the envelope by the number of cubic meters contained inside, this typology is always lower than any of the other ones. So and what does this mean? It means that the inside and the outside, or let's say the skin, is much more independent from what happens inside that in most other typologies, possibly with the or probably with the exception of the vertical side of the previous type, where that kind of relationship is very tenuous. But also because of the nature of these envelopes, normally they are public buildings. They are buildings that have a variety of functions. They are not just the repetition of a section on the ground to host a market or to host a retail center or the handling of passengers of an airport, or if you look for the vertical typologies, an optimal bay of space that is used for residential or for commercial functions. These buildings normally have, I mean, you can imagine them as libraries or auditoriums, this type of buildings. So they are buildings of public nature that usually require an additional level of concern with how the building represents and communicates what happens inside of this public building. So it's a type of envelope that has a very high level of request on a representational level and a very low level of request on an environmental level. And I think that its potentials, its political potentials also have to do with those parameters. And what happens is that it's a typology that is often used by architects to play. I mean, it's a typology that enables architects a great deal of freedom in terms of surfacial experimentation. And so you see architects delving into all kinds of experiments that have nothing to do with the functioning of the building, but that has primarily the interest of communicating the organization to the outside. And you see in many of these experiments that architects are not only exploring tessellations or exploring technologies that we have now that probably didn't exist 20 years ago, at least they were not affordable, like silk screening, the possibility of layering the functions of the surface in entirely new ways, using CNC technology to produce these tessellations and so on and so forth. So what you see in all these examples that I just showed is some sort of latent desire of architects and probably of the societies where those architects work, of producing organizations that are consistent and yet differentiated. I mean, I think that this is my favorite case, is the case of the Olympic buildings in China. But you can see that invariably, no matter what architects works, ends up with the same recipe for the envelope, a kind of pattern that has a kind of differentiated nature. And think what that means in terms of political message. We are still able to do big projects. We are still one, but as opposed to in the Mao years where there was a kind of suit for everybody, the same. We are becoming sensitive to differences or individuals and so on and so forth. So just to show two projects that are actually not, we haven't done very many of these types, and usually also these types are not buildings that I mean, we have done an auditorium that I didn't bring because I didn't think it was that interesting in terms of the experimentation, but they are buildings that are not cheap in the sense that I was referring at the beginning. They're not buildings for profit, they're public buildings. But two projects that I think have that we've done that have a research that has to do with this representational content as opposed to environmental content of the surface of the building is this project that we finished a couple of years ago in Leicester, also in the Midlands in the UK, where we had to make a cineplex and a department store as the anchor of a redeveloped shopping center, and we basically were given this plan We were able to kink a little bit the surface, but not very much, because they already had outline planning permission, and we were told to simply make these two functions there. We did design the structure and everything, but we didn't do anything. I mean, it's irrelevant what happens. I mean, it's kind of correctly done by the office, but the brief of the project is so constrained that there is not much you can do inside of there. And in fact, this is another one of the reasons why I'm interested in envelopes, because I identified as probably the last domain where architects have some power. In all the other areas, you get retail experts and cinema experts and housing experts and so on and so forth, and they know exactly what to do. So there are very limited possibilities of operating with the plan and the section as architects in the past did in order to transform reality, and we are now constrained to the skin. So in this case, the argument was to, okay, there is John Lewis, which is kind of generic British department store, and an American, actually, an American cinema operator who have to occupy the building. But what we wanted to do was to relate the skin to some of the contents, the historical contents of the city of Leicester, as one of the important cities where there was textile industry in the 19th century. John Lewis is also a company that has a long tradition of hosiery and lace. So in a way, we turned that into the message that skin was going to convey. And so we managed to convince the client to do this kind of very expensive skin made with 2 layers of, so it's a cheap project, but in this case it turned out to be expensive, which is 2 layers of silkscreen glass with a drawing that was selected for its geometrical qualities of coverage, for example, and later on you will see geometry out of the archives of John Lewis. And then we redrew it in order to make a number of tiles. It is 8 tiles that by mirroring them would enable us to first give consistency to the whole building, as opposed to what happens normally with these buildings, which are blank envelopes where the architects are usually forced to make kind of collage, like you paint this blue and you paint this gray and you paint this yellow, and the whole thing looks a little bit like the scale of a city. Here it was almost the reverse of that. We turn everything into a single floating lace box. And then we differentiated. We differentiated in order to provide areas of higher and lower transparency, both to the visual the visual relationship between inside and outside, but also in terms of shading the envelope from the sun. So you see, the pattern is manipulated, and by this manipulation we can provide more or less density, and is shaped to kind of embrace the heads of the people inside. And this looks silly, but is not, because when you look from inside, you see through at the height of your head, like that, because there is an overlap of the two patterns. But when you look from outside, you see that the two patterns overlap, so view is obstructed. This is how this facade works. So in a way, here the pattern challenges the unitized system of the facade with this silk screen lace that can adjust and can adjust to different densities. And so these are some photographs of that envelope that because it's mirror fit. Sometimes it picks up the neighbor, sometimes it reflects the sky, sometimes it becomes more opaque depending on whether the sun is or not hitting it, and at night produces these sorts of lace effects as if it was a kind of Chinese lantern that change color. Second project on this category of spherical is a project that is now under construction in Greenwich, in front of the dome, in that orange area, and it's a building that looks like this. It's a School of Design and Communication, and it's a building that is located in front of the dome, and it has to adjust to a kind of crescent-like urban regulations surrounding the dome, which we turn into kind of kinked, jagged form that works better with the function of the school to happen inside. But I think what is interesting in terms of this discussion is that because of that position right in front of the dome, which is a massive blank object in the field, we started thinking from the very beginning in the possibility of doing something that is almost it doesn't look like a building. It looks also like some sort of container, and being the school part of the arts and crafts tradition, we thought that maybe a possible idea would be to use wallpaper as an envelope, kind of these floral wallpapers of William Morris. So the building became that container that was largely dictated by the local regulations. There are some interesting things in the section because we have a system of split levels that is aimed to enhance movement vertically. There is a sequence of atriums, but we are not going to talk about that. We are going to be focusing on this idea of some sort of silo, wallpaper silo that contains the school in front of the dome. And again, this latent desire of all contemporary architects of differentiating buildings. In this case, the pattern of fenestration is differentiated following the different functions inside of the building. This is an unfolding of the functions attached to the facade. So you see also that as a challenge to the conventional type of spherical envelope. In this case, what we are doing is to try to reconnect the inside and the outside, to use this membrane not as something that is a kind of free floating representation, but on the contrary is something deeper that relates to the programs and to other issues you will see later on. So this is the system. It's a split level system that produces a double fenestration inside of the studios. It is very much like an architecture school, except there is not a lot of architecture, but similar things. So these two level of windows are able to change in order to provide the flexibility of having different types of perforation of the envelope. You see, when the windows become larger, they become also corrugated. You will see later on why. Because of this. These are the floral tiles, the floral petals in the wallpaper, but instead of being replicating nature, they are made with this non-periodic, non-regular tessellation invented by British mathematician called Roger Penrose, that allow us to cover the field just by using these different tiles. And so you see how they produce the system of windows that make the building, and why, when this becomes larger, the edge of these roses becomes dictated by the tessellation system of the of the envelope. And you see what they do in section, and what is interesting, I think, about the system and how it links the ornamental quality of the skin with the function, which is dictated basically by the size of the window and by the position of the section. You see the section always including two sets of windows, but you see that when the window size changes, the pattern changes. So the pattern is different around here, and this occurs automatically when we color code every one of the tiles in respect to the polar center of this polar array, these rows around every one of the windows. So this is what happens. You see how the pattern changes as the window size changes. And this is a one-to-one mock-up to test the facade. Next category. Are we already running late? Very late? We're okay? Okay, sort of okay. Okay, if it becomes really embarrassing, let me know. So flat vertical typology is, you all know this type of buildings. They are buildings where there are two dimensions, one of them vertical, that are much larger than the other one. The city, basically after the Enlightenment, is built the fabric of the city is built with this typology, which replicates and optimizes depth of space for whatever functions are required, and that the repetition of that and the configuration of that band of contained space is what forms the fabric of the city, and that's, I think, one of the first important potentials of playing with this type of envelope, which is how the envelope relates and defines public space, and how it distinguishes open public space from private public space, for example, in the case of traditional cities. You can see examples of these, interesting examples of this. What happens when this envelope is used by the welfare state in Europe? This is Toulouse-les-Mirails. You see the blocks suddenly have no front, no back. The public open space has occupied the whole ground of the city. I mean, some of these things in Bijlmermeer are doing the same thing, as opposed to those older examples of, for example, Barcelona or Turin, where the block is actually dividing the public space from the private open space. So I think that this is, first of all, one of the most powerful things we can do when deploying this typology, which is to consider it, how does it relate to the space of the city. But this typology has also another very interesting potential in terms of transforming the society that inhabits it, which is that, as opposed to what was happening in the previous typology, where the skin is basically independent, in this typology, the figuration of the building and the environmental performance coincide very or collide in that superficial envelope. So as opposed to the previous ones, here that is a very active skin that regulates the climatic exchanges, and at the same time it is also what makes the face of the community, and sometimes represents very directly what that face does, sometimes insisting in the independence between the cells of the individuals that compose the building, sometimes insisting in the industry, in the system that produces those envelopes. And lately you see again all these experiments trying to show that the communities that inhabit those envelopes are differentiated, are not just exactly the same. I mean, you see examples like this, where that is very intentionally deployed. Almost, I think today it's impossible to do a building that is totally repetitive, because people will understand that it is politically incorrect. So how that differentiated skin relates with climatic conditions and so on and so forth, I think is a very exciting field to explore. And we explored it in a housing block that we built in Madrid, in the outskirts of Madrid. This is kind of very cheap social housing, where we were given a site and we decided to concentrate all the FAR in one side of the site, so that every unit will have a view of a private garden and a public garden on the other side that existed there. So in order to do that, and we had a kind of limit of height, in order to do that, we needed to resort to a very deep space, and that gave us the idea that maybe because we have a very low facade ratio, we can try to produce social housing made out of glass. But then realizing that we were in Madrid, and that the building is oriented north-south in this direction, so this is east and west facade, we needed to introduce some kind of solar shading device that then became that double skin, which produces terraces for every unit, and act as a kind of climatic buffer. You also see that the units are have double aspect, so that enhances cross ventilation, etc., etc. So these are the units. We are not gonna look at them. This is the skin, which is based also on some sort of local shading device that windows in Madrid have. But the particularity of this experiment is that these windows have or are going to be made with bamboo or some sort of local variety of very cheap material, which produces this. So this is the finished project, and I think what is more, in my opinion, more successful about this is that it produces. It doesn't have to resort to this type of collage. Like, I mean, here you see where architects have to invent all kinds of things to escape from regularity. In this case, everything is consistent, everything is regular, and yet the fact that people move the louvers differentially to accommodate to their desires produces that changing picture of collective desire on the facade, and changing and differentiated picture of collective desire in the facade that is not just a picture, is not just a collage, but is produced by actually having some kind of environmental performance. Well, these are simply these terraces wrapped in bamboo when they are open, when they are closed. The other project that I brought is very quickly, is a project that we designed in the city of London, in this location here recently, and is now on hold, like most of these commercial projects, waiting for the credit to come back. But it's basically 3 central core buildings, very conventional office buildings that for different reasons, for view corridors and lighting, daylighting conditions, shadows being cast on the neighbors, adopt this form, which is a kind of crystalline form. It's like 3 little jewels in a cluster with this form. So what is interesting about what we did here with the envelope, these are some of the plans. You see, it's a relatively again conventional inside. There is nothing we can do there. It's a commercial project. We cannot change, but we can play with those deformations of the skin in order to produce the architectural expression of the project. But not more than that. This architectural expression, because it's crystalline, it had to be glass, but glass is now a material that is not quite sustainable. So we needed to think about some sort of solar shading device. So we ask, there is one slide missing, but we ask OVARUP to measure how the sun will hit the different faces of these surfaces, these kind of faceted surfaces. And so they gave us areas that had more solar exposure because they were tilted, for example, towards the sky, and some areas that were to the north didn't really need much protection from solar exposure. So what we did was to devise, in this case, 3 systems of tiles that are fritted following a pattern, but there is only a discrete number of them that produce, again, that picture of differentiation, again linking the expression of the building, the expression of differentiation in this case, which is this kind of political unconscious desire with an environmental performance of the skin. And so those are those building, and this is how the skin would be patterned by differentially by this system. Okay, last category, if I may, vertical. I think what is interesting about this category is that friction between the environmental performances of the skin and the representation of the iconographic performance of the building is is at the maximum. So these buildings have the most dominant presence in the urban skyline, but at the same time those skins are the most expensive, the most the ones that have to perform best because they are very expensive. So the kind of play between that kind of approach of vertical envelopes, which we see deployed everywhere, where basically buildings are recovered, conventional buildings are recovered with literally with images that try to connect with different meanings, with different iconographies, local iconographies, versus this typology of vertical envelope. This is Hong Kong, where you probably have remembered to have seen these very corrugated skins of the envelopes that had actually absolutely no meaning, no representation. They're just this is how these things look like in plan. So you see the complexity of folding the envelope in order to obtain certain facade ratios that, for example, allow for natural ventilation or daylight to every room in the building, as opposed to this, which is Dubai, where you see that nobody wants to connect to the outside. Nobody cares about natural ventilation. Nobody cares about daylight. Everything is artificial inside of this, and that's why the skin is suddenly much less articulated, because it doesn't matter the relationship between outside and inside. So this type of relationships is where I think maybe lies the most relevant research to be done with this typology in the future, which is how to move from the paradigmatic prototypical image of the tower to a vertical envelope that actually relates to all these climatic performances. The tower by nature is one of the building types that is most exposed to the sun and to the wind, and that has also cast shadows on the surrounding field. So I think there are many arguments that we can use to produce a kind of anisotropic typology of towers. This is some of the research that we've done in the office, where you can see that the facade ratios between the UK and the facade ratios in Malaysia or Hong Kong are substantially different. So again, that gives you an indication of what is the relationship between the skin and the space that is contained inside of the building, and how that produces an entirely different expression of the building. Look at how these buildings work, and look at how these more Western type buildings work. I think there are cultural reasons for this differentiation. Not, obviously, in Hong Kong, the climate is perhaps more humid, but I think that the main reason for these differences between some towers and other towers is cultural. Is that in Southeast Asia, people living in high-rise buildings are still not accepting that these buildings are that they are living in an artificial environment, and so they shape them to obtain the same domestic environments that we can see in low-rise buildings. So things that one can mobilize when playing with vertical envelopes. One of them is the structure. This is a diagram from our proposal for Ground Zero for Max Protege, which was a kind of utopian proposal where we were trying to propose the building as one more step in the evolution of high-rise typologies. So we shaped the envelope trying to mobilize this kind of diagonal nature of lateral forces in the building. So which basically produce also internal effects, but also related to other representational contents. I mean, all these images are also part of that idea of making the envelope representing certain, conveying certain messages that are. So I mean, you probably have seen that there is a kind of thread through all these examples in which the representational becomes reattached to the functional, as opposed to be more independent. So more research related to the structure has to do with how the envelope acts structurally, and the surprise of discovering that actually the mass of the building, the geometry of the footprint has decisive effects in the performance. This is the same area, and this works much better than the other two, for example. This type of experiments is also some of the research that we are doing that relate to the vertical envelope. This is part of the research that I've been developing in Princeton, and that relates to all these subjects. Is a proposal for an atlas of ideal footprints, high-rise footprints, and is something that we developed by looking at climate data and looking at solar exposure of different types of envelopes, and by using programs play with different types of plans. So the idea is to propose like a manual where high-rise buildings are not just contingent ideas of architects, but are actually having very specific performance in certain latitudes, and for example, depending on the humidity of the climate or the degree of tolerance to artificial environments of the population, those basic forms corrugate. And so the students managed to develop this map of recommended footprint types worldwide. It's a kind of megalomaniac project, but I think quite quite interesting. As a kind of critique of the star architecture of high rises, doing whatever whoever wants to do at a certain time. Not going to. These are some. I mean, three very quickly, three examples, and I finish with this of how we in the office have used these climatic ideas in the design of high rises. These two front towers are now under construction in Busan, in South Korea. They're residential high rises, where you can see that idea of corrugation being explored not only in plan but also in section, by trying to introduce these kind of spaces as customary spaces on the section of the building. And what is, I think, maybe more interesting for our discussion of this building is to see that, I mean, in Korea is, again, the relationship between the form of the building and the cultural performance of the building is remarkable, because in Korea there is some sort of cultural worship of the sun that means that if this is an apartment that is north facing, it will cost half of this apartment which is south facing. To that level of to that degree of difference between south facing and north facing apartments. And so you see that immediately the tower becomes anisotropic, becomes oriented, because we can maximize in a cube. You have only one south facing, two that are east-west, and one that is north, or depending on the orientation, but obviously a form like this, if properly oriented, provides a triangular form, provides much better performance in terms of solar orientation, and this is how the skin is then corrugated to alternatively to produce these glass house conservatories on the skin of the building. Second project is in Kuala Lumpur. Kuala Lumpur is a city that is nearly in the equator, where we have been also commissioned two residential towers exactly of the same height of the other ones. But you see that in this case, the towers are elongated and ideally oriented east-west, because that means that the narrowest facades are the ones that are exposed to the sun. In Kuala Lumpur, you don't want to be exposed to the sun. And on top of that, we also explored as an expressive trait of this envelope, things like this, which are part of the local language of architecture, trying to protect from the sun. So we make a menu of canopies protecting the facade from the sun, depending on the rooms inside, and this is basically the expression of these differences of orientation and function on the facade of the building. And the last one is a hotel that we designed and is also on hold on the northern location in Spain, where what is interesting is that the sun is also important, culturally speaking, but in this case the views are to the sea. So you have a condition of views and sun, not like in Korea where it was coincident, but in opposed directions, and so that leads us to use a round plan then with a number of corrugations that I'm not going to explain very much. I just wanted to show you how the form of the basic form of the building is actually dependent on climatic conditions, views, and also cultural preferences. This is a kind of derivation of this project in Seoul, actually, where we have the same problem of views to the river on one direction and solar sun coming from the other direction. So there are different iterations of these circular plans. And this is the last project. I mean, I had some other things, but I think I'm already over exhausted the time. So there is no conclusion to this. It's kind of sudden death lecture, because it is really, there is no conclusion. It is a kind of ongoing research. And hopefully in a couple of years' time, I will be able to, or I'm targeting to make a manual of the contemporary building envelope, and then I can come again and tell you what the results are. Thank you very much for your attention.
Check.
Cool. And we have a mobile microphone. You can also yell, and Alejandro will repeat the question for viewers outside.
They're exhausted.
Social.
You talked about architecture and architects being, agents for political change and taking a more active role than some of, other people in your generation have. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more explicitly about how your practice has been engaged with that in, some of these recent projects.
Well, I think that we engage with that on a very basic level. I'm not going to claim that systematically in all these projects we put the political as the main performance of the project, because as I said at the very beginning, perhaps these are more indexes rather than examples of what we should do, and I think it will be also very naive and difficult to pretend that that we are making very important political transformations by doing these projects. But I believe we are in some of them targeting or managing to address some of these issues. For example, I would like to foreground here the Carabanchel one, the housing with the movable screens, because I think that this is genuinely an interesting statement in terms of how the community perceives the people who live in that building. That combination of a consistent system that is then differentiated in space and in time by the people moving those louvers produces a certain image of the community that is not the collage community, and all these things are very important now as a matter of representation in Europe and in some of these peripheral locations around major cities in Europe, because there is a lot of immigration. And I don't know if you have heard, I mean, I'm fascinated with this issue, because in Europe after 2001 there have been a number of instances in which politicians have attacked differentiation as a valid political position. One of them is Chirac banning religious signs in classrooms. Probably you heard about this, but even more interesting than the Chirac one, which is quite specific, is the statement that Trevor Phillips made. Trevor Phillips is used to be the head of the Commission for Racial Equality in the UK, and he's himself a man from ethnic origins with family in the Caribbean. But at some point he came forward and said that he was going to abandon the policy of the multicultural policy that the British government has been having since the 70s, because it is only producing ghettoization. So the British government, till Trevor Phillips, was giving money to the Caribbean community to keep the carnivals, and to such and such community to do something else, and to keep all this wealth of differences in the country. But he said that only produces ghettoization, and so he invented something called Britishness exam, as opposed to which is in a way a device to try to give consistency to the culture. I don't think he's entirely wrong in what he's saying, by the way. I mean, it looks kind of suspicious, but I think that that it is probably necessary, and this is something that also now the Dutch government has started to do after the assassination of Theo van Gogh. So in Europe, those peripheral communities are represented, let's say, after the 80s by this kind of collage-like housing, that everything is of a different color, but there is actually no reason why it is like that. It's a kind of pure matter of representation, as opposed to kind of the modernist examples of social housing in the periphery, where you have these buildings that are totally repetitive, brutalist buildings in the outskirts of London or Paris. And what I am interested in the one in Madrid is that it touches upon that representational or those representations of the culture of housing in those peripheral areas around the cities, and manages to produce something that is differentiated but at the same time is consistent, as opposed, say, to the kind of MVRDV, which I think is a great building, but in that sense, that is a kind of representation of diversity, while this is kind of real diversity that is actually expressed through architecture. I believe that this is probably as far as we can go as architects. I mean, I don't think that we can. When I say we need to gain political agency, I'm not saying in the field of conventional political discourse. I think precisely the opportunity is in mobilizing those concrete devices to produce certain effects, and not necessarily having to inherit or to represent the conventional political discourses, which has been the way in which architects, politically engaged architects, have traditionally performed. I don't know whether there are opportunities. I think the type of conditions in which the commission of these towers are produced are more difficult to challenge than in Madrid, where we were working for the local government, who was prepared to make this experiment of the bamboo. I believe that the opportunity. You cannot. Probably there are opportunities to do things like that. I'm not saying there are not, but they are smaller. And I didn't explain it very much. For example, when I was showing the Kuala Lumpur project, but another one of the things that we did in that project was to exploit the section of the project. You see that the pattern changes from one place to another of the. It has different patterns depending on the region of the building, and that is because it is reflecting this diagram, which is a diagram of I don't know where it is now. I mean, you see the section, this diagram. So, by definition, we are supposed to locate different types within the towers, and in this case, that is what we try to mobilize in order to produce those different possibilities within the building, and to express them, rather than having a constant envelope with always the same terrace. You see that Of course, I mean, you can also say this is not very politically correct because you see the biggest penthouses at the top, 5 and plus 1 bedrooms, 4 plywood, and as you go down, they are the kind of cheaper range of apartments. This is something that probably, if we had real power, we could challenge. At the moment, obviously, you will be fired immediately if you propose. So we choose to be pliant and yet try to express that differentiation in the section of the building. So you see that the tower is not straight, but it has these slight movements that play with the corrugation as a kind of expression of difference. But it's very difficult to challenge some of the structures that you get with these commissions. So successful. Accessible.
Today, as it was perhaps back when those projects were.
No, I mean, I'm still very interested in the whole thing of the diagram. It's just that when you shift from more of a speculative practice or an emerging practice to a practice that provides architectural services, to kind of makes buildings for clients and commissions and things like that, there is a more limited function of those devices. There is still a function, and it's still something that is somehow at the back of our minds. But let's say you don't have time to kind of get a diagram and develop it and complexify it and extract an architectural expression out of it. You act in a much more. It's not that these drawings have no diagrams. So I just show you one, for example, that shows the distribution of space in the section of the tower and how it becomes embedded in the form. But the research becomes much more immediate, much more about understanding the problem, producing more or less a certain organization, and then mainly concentrating in the resolution of those of the geometries of those envelopes. So it is something that is not as much part of the work that we are doing now as in the origins, and not because I think is irrelevant, but because we've moved to a different operation, that where the diagram is perhaps less effective.